Well, I was joined a short time ago from New York by Katrina vanden Heuvel, editorial director and publisher of The Nation. And I started by asking her if she thinks sanctions will work. Will they stop Vladimir Putin from trying to take over the whole country and the capital, Kiev?
I don't think the sanctions are going to play the key role. Vladimir Putin and the Russian government have worked in the last few years to make sure the Russian economy is self-sufficient to a large extent. I think certain steps, more extreme steps the Biden administration might take, for example, regulating or shutting down the export of Russian oil and gas, not going to happen because of the collateral damage to the West and to the United States.
So how will the sanctions work? What will be their effect?
So President Biden gave a speech earlier today. They're talking about sanctioning two major state banks that have defense ties, a sovereign fund, 3 or 4 Putin oligarchs, and family and property. The danger is that in some ways, the oligarchical sanctions may play to Putin's benefit in the sense that the Russian government has been working for years to seek oligarchical repatriation of their funds. The state banks, possibly, but as I said, the $1.5 trillion Russian economy has been working overtime in these last 4 or 5 years to be more self-sufficient.
Now, Anthony Blinken's called this the biggest conflict in Europe since World War II. Is that a fair assessment, or is he overblowing it there?
You know what I think I have to say? I think the parallels to World War II are often misguided. There's more an element of World War I, where there's a stumble into war, and that is dangerous because if you do have U.S. advisors inside Ukraine, which may well be the case again, and U.S. weapons and NATO weapons, the danger of a miscommunication, miscalculation. Now, this is not to excuse Russia, which has, violated international rules, and that has to be carefully squared and looked at. But again, I come back to sanctions may not be the impact that is needed, because I think there's great fear in this country, certainly on the Biden administration's part, of growing inflation, growing higher gas prices, and that collateral damage is going to play a role. You also have the Republican Party, crazily, I think, saying Biden's not tough enough and he's an appeaser. That, I think, is folly. Again, I come back to World War I, not the lessons which are misguided in this instance of World War II. Well,
it's interesting you say that because it does kind of look as if Joe Biden's weak. Now, whether that's because of any of his actions, I mean, unless he wants to bring on a world war, what are his options? But the fact is, if Russia goes in, if Putin ignores him, that's the inevitable look of the thing, unfortunately for him, isn't it?
Well, I'll tell you one thing we haven't talked about, which is very central. I don't think China and Russia are natural allies. However, Russia could play the China card. China was quite clear, though it hasn't been as carefully reported, in condemning the upending of the Minsk Accords, which demanded that Russia not recognize these two breakaway republics. But China's, a possibility for Russia to ally with. So I think that's a danger for the United States. And I do think President Biden is in a weak position for various domestic reasons. And I don't think this is going to win him popularity points. I do think there's a real distinction these days between the Beltway inside Washington, D.C., the elite, and the rest of the country, which I think is tired. I don't want to speak for my country, but there is a fatigue with endless war. There's not an isolationism as much as just, we got a lot of problems at home. Can we fix those before we go out and seek demons?
Yes, and Joe Biden, look, there's speculation here as well as in America, obviously, about his mental fitness, his age. How do you think he's holding up and how he's perceived domestically around that?
I don't like to play the age card. I do think he knows his docket. Trump showed signs of aging too. I think it's deeper than that. I think it's being marinated, as are many of his appointees in foreign affairs, in debacles and old thinking. Many of these people brought us the Iraq War. Many of them continue to believe in a militarized foreign policy. I'm no pacifist, but I do think the crises of our time have to do with climate crisis, have to do with pandemics, staggering global inequality. And I think those are not going to be met by weapons. And this is to say that in Russia, too, there's obsolete thinking on the part of the elite. They have their own blob. It's not all Putin. Putin is clearly soft authoritarian, a dictator, but there are forces in that country which are more extreme than he is. And we've maybe seen that play out in what we've witnessed in the push to recognize the two breakaway republics, which is a failure of diplomacy, but I don't see an alternative. And when I say diplomacy, I mean, just finding a way to regroup, to maybe compartmentalize nuclear security issues, which are critical and have often been compartmentalized in other Cold Wars. But there's no question this is the most serious confrontation, not to sound like Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, the most serious confrontation between the United States and Russia since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Personally, I find what has happened in Europe with Germany and France playing a somewhat independent role from the United States in these last weeks hopeful. I think it would be healthy to have a more independent Europe. And I certainly don't buy the idea that it's about Putin destabilizing Europe. I think it's partly about they have their own interests. And of course, the Nord Stream pipeline we didn't talk about, that is, still in play. It wasn't going to be approved in any case until July. But that too will have collateral damage in Europe and perhaps in this country if shut down, as it now seems, by sanction.
Katrina vanden Heuvel, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.